Chapter 54. Lee Sung-baek frowned. Regret? Did he just say regret? What a fearless child. Usually, Lee Sung-baek wasn't the sort of man to judge someone based on their age or status, but this young kid from Mount Hua seemed too self-indulgent. No matter how good he isn't even old enough to understand just how significant the difference between his sect and the other sects is. Yet he is out here speaking such things. How could he hold his head high and say such shameless statements, knowing that his sect was at the bottom? Let's stay strong. Lee Sung-baek sighed and continued. You're saying you agreed to spar? Yes. A blunt but calm answer. Lee Sung-baek opened his mouth and asked, What is your Taoist name? Don't have one. I'm Chongmyeong. Chongmyeong. Chongmyeong it is. He already knew it, but he still asked for his name. Look here, disciple Chongmyeong. I'll give you a piece of advice. You may think that nothing is wrong with what you're doing, but the world's affairs aren't determined solely by one person. I suggest you return to Mount Hua. Aren't we going to fight? Lee Sung-baek flinched. Chongmyeong yawned as if he was bored and then said, It seems like the Jungnam sect fight with their mouths. Why did you say you wanted to fight, only to waste my time talking? Lee Sung-baek smiled. My discipline is lacking. Feeling that his desire to destroy that wretched bastard soar. There's no need to rush. We will start now. As Lee Sung-baek grabbed his sword, Go-hee gently grabbed his sleeve. Sayoung, you intend to do this yourself? Lee Sung-baek looked back at him. You don't have to do it, Sayoung. I'll do it. No. Sayoung. Lee Sung-baek answered with firm eyes. There is minimum courtesy we must show to the opponent. I am the most mature of us here, so fighting against me wouldn't be too shameful for that child. In the end, Go-hee sighed and stepped back. Anyway, Sayoung is too much. He was in a position to become a great disciple of the sect. The Jungnam sect's Lee Sung-baek wants to spar with Mount Hwa's Chongmyeong. Ah, wait a minute. What now? Chongmyeong tilted his head as he looked at Go-hee and said, Lend me your sword. Go-hee's eyes widened. Borrow my sword? How could a disciple from a once prestigious sect be like this? When entering a sect that teaches swordsmanship, the first thing one learns is to never let another person lay hands on their sword. Are you saying that disciples of your sect don't even carry their own sword? Well, I'm sorry for not expecting a fight. Mount Hua is— Don't bother if you don't want to. Chongmyeong turned around. I'll check and see if there's anything like a stick worth using instead of a sword. Lee Sung-baek frowned. Lend him your sword. Sayoung! Do you want people to say that disciples of the Jungnam sect fought a disciple of Mount Hua when he didn't even have a proper sword? Go-hee sighed deeply at Lee Sung-baek's words. Soon after, he took off the sword tied to his waist before throwing it to Chongmyeong. Thanks! Chongmyeong took the sword, held it in one hand, and looked at Lee Sung-baek. Let's get started, shall we? Won't you unsheath it? I'm not planning on killing you or anything. It'll stay like this. You can unsheath yours if you want to, though. Lee Sung-baek closed his eyes. Shit. The more he talked to this kid, the more it felt like all his years' worth of mental training was disappearing. Lee Sung-baek closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and raised his sword. Initially, he planned to just scare him off, but now, he thought it wouldn't be enough. Aside from his personal feelings, judging from the way he talks and the way he acts, he won't understand until he's broken apart. Lee Sung-baek, who judged Chongmyeong's character through the short conversation, was ready. Don't let your guard down. Yeah. Chongmyeong lifted the sheathed sword. Seeing that, Lee Sung-baek frowned. You had better do it right. My hands are strong and fast. It will be too late to regret after you've been struck. Excuse me? Chongmyeong sighed deeply and said, Hurry up, will you? What are we still standing around for? Come at me. You! Anger deeply covered Lee Sung-baek's face. I'll change that attitude of yours. In the end, he threw away all the manners a Taoist had to have and flew towards Chongmyeong. Pop! The clear and simple sword of the Jungnam sect. Among the 10 sects, each sect was famous for their swordsmanship or their Taoism with distinct characteristics of their own. The Wudang sect's sword is known to be soft, Mount Hua is splendid, and the sword of the Jungnam sect was serious. A heavy sword excluding all changes and tricks, very much like the past, struck towards Chongmyung's neck. Chongmyung slightly raised his sword and blocked the attack. Kang! The blade and sheathed blade collided, producing a sharp metallic sound. Ta! Lee Song-baek swung his sword again, this time aiming for Chongmyung's flank. Fast and strong. Even if there was time for a counterattack, no one would have the courage to, due to the sword's immense force, which desired to split his waist in half. Kang! And again, Chongmyung lowered his sword to block the attack. He hesitated. Chongmyung, who couldn't handle the weight of the heavy sword, took a step back. Lee Song-baek noticed this slight hesitation and swung his sword to drive Chongmyung further into a corner. Whoa! Go-hee, who was watching the match, smiled leisurely. Sahyung seems quite angry. He doesn't seem to want to end this. Huh, that kid just kept saying whatever you wanted and ended up pissing off Sahyung. You really need to judge who you can and can't afford to offend. Huh? Is Sahyung scolding that child now? Ah, yes. He can finish this match whenever he wants to. But can't you see that he's trying to hold back? I'm sure that kid must feel like shit right now, just trying to survive Sahyung's onslaught. As said, Chongmyung was constantly moving back and forth. Looking at the sight unfolding in front of them, Wei Hansu tilted his head. Doesn't it seem like he's blocking a little too well, though? That's the great thing about Sahyung. What would people say if Sahyung took down a child in an instant? Ah. He quickly grasped the child's limitations and pushed him with enough strength and speed to just barely continue blocking it. He doesn't even need to hit him to teach him a lesson. Go-hee looked proud while saying that. Honestly, he doesn't need to go to such lengths to educate that kid. The kid should be thankful for his lesson. You too, stop doubting Sahyung. Yes. Go-hee clicked his tongue. It's hard to believe that someone as gentle as Sahyung has gotten so angry. Well, anyone would be angry at that child's attitude. I just hope Sahyung doesn't get too excited. However, despite the thoughtful appreciation of the crowd, Lee Song-baek, who was attacking, was giving it his all to beat Chongmyung. Kang! Blocked again? It was strange. It shouldn't have been blocked. Contrary to what Go-hee was saying about controlling his speed and strength, Lee Song-baek was constantly accelerating. Why am I being blocked? Chongmyung's sword wasn't fast. It wasn't slow, but also not fast enough to make the opponent wary. However, even with that, he could block Lee Song-baek's sword. That slow sword seemed to preemptively arrive and patiently await where Lee Song-baek would strike. I haven't even thought about where I'm going to strike, but he's already there. What the hell is going on here? Could he read sword movement? No, he wasn't at that level. There was no way a young disciple of Mount Hua could read swords, and even if he could, it would be impossible to do it in action. To block his sword with that slow movement, it was as if he could read minds. No, even before Lee Song-baek decided on a path, that kid was moving his sword. How could such a thing be possible? Was he a ghost? Ah! Lee Song-baek groaned as he swung his sword. No matter how much he looked at the child, he judged that he couldn't be any older than 15 years old. Considering his age, he should be around his younger brother's age. However, such a child blocked Lee Song-baek's sword without any difficulty. His sword was one of the most renowned within the Hua Sect. Impossible. Lee Song-baek's sword began to shine with ki. Clearly, the spar began with only a little strength, but now he had unknowingly induced internal ki as his strength rapidly rose. Swoosh! A strong gale gushed out from the sword. Kang! Lee Song-baek's sword, which was lightly surrounded by internal ki, couldn't push away Chongmyung's sword. A wall. It seemed like a wall. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get through it. It felt like a wall made of hard steel. Lee Song-baek swung his sword as hard as he could. Seeing the wind fluttering around Lee Song-baek's sword, Go-hee screamed. Sahyung, don't overdo it! Go-hee's shrill voice echoed clearly in Lee Song-baek's ears. Ah, what do I do? Lee Song-baek quickly called back his ki. The heavy internal energy dispersed from the blade as the momentum lowered, and what he swung was a barren sword that was merely a bit faster than normal. However, Kwang! There was an explosion from out of the blue as Chongmyung's body shot back like an arrow in flight. Huh? He was stuck to the wall. There were cracks spread like spiderwebs along the wall that Chongmyung struck. His body slowly slid down before settling on the floor. Lee Sung-baek was in shock. "Sayoung!" Go-wi ran to him in panic. "What did you do?" No, Obviously, he recalled his ki from the final strike. Even with all his might, he couldn't cause a scratch on Chongmyung. It made no sense for the child to be pushed back so much without the sword even striking him. It was then Chongmyung, who collapsed on the floor, convulsed, and suddenly began to spurt blood from his mouth like a fountain. Everyone was frightened and ran to Chongmyung. Only one person, Lee Sung-baek, stood rooted in place as the color drained from his face. Blood soared like a fountain rushing out. Wow, who could imagine that blood could spurt out of a person's mouth like that? Anyone with eyes would believe that Lee Sung-baek was at fault for this. "Sayoung!" Lee Sung-baek couldn't understand what was happening. Chongmyung's mouth was dripping with blood. He clearly appeared to be injured severely. It wouldn't be too strange even if he flopped over and drew his last breath. Just when Lee Sung-baek managed to regain his senses and was about to run to Chongmyung. "What the hell is going on here?" Everyone's eyes turned to the voice. Lee Sung-baek had no choice but to tightly close his eyes with a grim expression. With a face full of anger that he had never seen before, Hwang Jong-gi was glaring at him.